Get out of the way, old woman. This is a command deck, not a retirement home. The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, cut through the controlled chaos of the Aegis 7 Command Information Center. Commander Valerius Thorn, his uniform a starched testament to his self-importance, didn't even break stride. The small crowd of junior officers and enlisted technicians, already tense from the unfolding crisis, flinched. A few nervous snickers rippled through the air, quickly suppressed. They parted before Thorn like reeds in a current, their eyes darting towards the target of his scorn. A woman of indeterminate age, clad in a simple, unadorned gray duty jumpsuit, her silver-streaked hair tied back in a severe, practical knot. She had been standing perfectly still before a secondary telemetry console, her gaze fixed on a waterfall of data that most of the crew had deemed irrelevant to the immediate emergency. She offered no reaction to the insult. Her spine didn't stiffen, her head didn't turn. She simply absorbed the commander's dismissive shove, a blow that sent her stumbling back a half-step until her shoulder met the cold, unyielding metal of a structural bulkhead. She didn't grunt in pain or gasp in surprise. Her focus remained unbroken, her pale eyes tracking a single, oscillating frequency on the screen as if Thorn and his entire world of blustering authority were nothing more than a minor atmospheric disturbance. But from the elevated command perch overlooking the entire floor, the station's commander, Captain Elias Vance, saw it. He saw the woman's stance as she braced against the wall. Not the frail posture of victim, but the rooted, balanced footing of a fighter adjusting to an unexpected impact. He saw her hands, which never wavered, never clenched into fists, but remained relaxed and ready. He saw an economy of motion that spoke not of age or weakness, but of a profound and terrifying discipline. If you believe that true authority is earned in silence, not shouted from a pedestal, type competence below. The air on the command deck was thick with the scent of ozone and impending failure. The UNS Stalwart, a Defiance-class destroyer, was coming in dead, its primary drive offline after a catastrophic plasma leak in deep space. They were attempting a dead-stick landing, a maneuver that was less a docking procedure and more a controlled crash. Commander Thorn was orchestrating the response, his voice a booming, constant presence that filled every corner of the CIC. He barked orders for magnetic clamps, for tractor beam alignments, for emergency barrier fields, each command a perfect recitation from the Fleet Operations Manual. Yet, for all his textbook precision, the situation was deteriorating. The Stalwart was yawing, its rotational momentum bleeding off unevenly. The pilot's voice, strained and cracking with panic, was a stark counterpoint to Thorn's artificial calm. She's not responding. The port RCS thrusters are shot. I can't correct the spin. Thorn's face, usually a mask of smug control, began to show the fine cracks of pressure. His solutions, so elegant on paper, were failing to account for the chaotic reality of a dying ship. He was a man playing chess while the board was on fire. All the while, the woman in gray remained a statue of silent observation by the wall. The data stream she watched, the one monitoring subspace resonance and energy field cohesion around the station's docking bay, continued its frantic dance. She saw what Thorn, in his frantic adherence to procedure, could not. The problem wasn't just the ship, it was the dock. The emergency energy fields were interacting with the Stalwart's failing containment fields, creating a subtle, invisible turbulence that was compounding the destroyer's spin. Her presence was a quiet rebuke to the loud incompetence unfolding around her. She was an island of calm in a sea of procedural panic, a living embodiment of the gap between knowing the rules and understanding the game. The klaxons began to blare, a shrill, piercing scream that signaled the final stage of failure. The Stalwart had breached the final safety corridor, its trajectory now promising a glancing but catastrophic impact with the docking ring. Full power to the tractor beams. Override the safeties. Thorn roared, his voice now frayed with desperation. But the beams were already at maximum, their ethereal blue light straining against the destroyer's chaotic momentum with no discernible effect. The technicians looked at their consoles, then at their commander, their faces pale with the certainty of disaster. It was in that moment of absolute, deafening silence between the alarm cycles that a new voice emerged. It was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of panic. Negative, the woman in gray said, the single word cutting through the tension like a scalpel. She pushed off the bulkhead, her movement not hurried, but deliberate, and stepped towards the auxiliary navigation console that had been abandoned by a junior officer. That will tear her apart, Thorne spun around, his face a contorted mask of fury and disbelief. Who in the hell do you think you are? Security, get this civilian off my deck. But no one moved. All eyes were on the woman. Her fingers, long and steady, ghosted over the holographic controls. They didn't tap or stab. They flowed, a fluid dance of practiced, intimate knowledge. She bypassed 3 levels of command authority with a code that hadn't been in active use for 50 years. The console chirped its acceptance. Her voice, now patched into the Stalwart's cockpit and the CIC's primary comms, was a low, melodic hum of pure authority. Stalwart, this is Aegis. Disengage your inertial dampeners on my mark. We're going to use the spin. The pilot, wild-eyed and desperate, barely registered the new voice. Who is this? I can't. The woman's command sliced through his panic. Pilot, my name is irrelevant. Your ship's name is not. You have 10 seconds to trust me. Listen to my voice. On my mark, the entire command deck held its breath. Commander Thorne stood frozen, his mouth agape, his order to security forgotten. He was witnessing a mutiny, a complete and total usurpation of his authority, but it was happening with such surgical precision that he was powerless to stop it. The woman's hands moved with an impossible grace, her eyes scanning a dozen different data points simultaneously. She was not just operating the console, she was communing with it. Mark, she said, her voice steady. Dampeners off. Now, give me a 2-second burn from your starboard maneuvering thrusters. Full power. On the main view screen, the Stalwart, which had been fighting its own death spin, suddenly seemed to embrace it. It accelerated into the rotation, a move that seemed utterly insane, a final, suicidal lurch towards the station. A collective gasp swept through the CIC. What is she doing? Someone whispered in horror. Thorne could only stare, his mind unable to process the flagrant violation of every known docking protocol. But the woman was already speaking again, her tone that of a master artisan shaping raw, violent energy. Stalwart, prepare to re-engage dampeners. I'm going to thread you through the needle. I need you to trust the magnetic bottle. She wasn't talking to the ship's systems anymore. She was talking to the station itself. She manually desynced the docking bay's primary magnetic clamps, reconfiguring them into a loose, asymmetrical funnel. It was a technique that existed only in theoretical manuals, a high-risk gamble deemed impossible to execute without a predictive AI that hadn't been invented yet. With a final, fluid gesture, she keyed in the last command. The spinning destroyer, instead of striking the station, entered the reconfigured magnetic field. The spin, once a death sentence, now became its salvation. The ship's own angular momentum caused it to skip off the magnetic fields like a stone on water, bleeding off velocity with each control bounce. The maneuver was terrifying, elegant, and utterly perfect. The U.S. Stalwart, groaning and shuddering, settled into its berth with a final, metallic sigh of contact. The klaxons fell silent. In the profound, echoing quiet that followed, the only sound was the gentle hum of the station's life support. The impossible had been made possible. Captain Elias Vance descended from his perch, his face unreadable. He walked past the shell-shocked Commander Thorne without a glance, his boots making slow, deliberate echoes on the deck plating. The crew parted for him, their stunned gazes shifting from the now-safe destroyer on the view screen to the quiet woman in the gray jumpsuit, who was methodically resetting the auxiliary console to its default settings as if she had done nothing more remarkable than file a routine report. Vance stopped directly in front of her. He didn't speak for a long moment, his eyes studying her face, searching for a memory. He had seen a maneuver like that once before, long ago, in a classified after-action report from the Black Nebula campaign. A high-risk, single-pilot extraction of a besieged intelligence asset, executed against impossible odds. The pilot's call sign was a legend, a ghost story whispered by veterans. The Archangel's Feather, Vance said, his voice low and filled with a dawning, profound reverence. They called it the Archangel's Feather, a theoretical maneuver. It's only been successfully performed once in recorded history. He turned to his aide, a young lieutenant who looked as if he'd just witnessed a miracle. Lieutenant, access the Fleet Command active duty roster. Search for Special Observation Assignment. Sector 7". The lieutenant's fingers trembled as he tapped at his datapad. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Thorne, finally shaking off his paralysis, took a hesitant step forward. Captain, I had the situation under control. This civilian interfered with a command-level operation. She must be. Vance cut him off, not with a shout, but with an almost imperceptible raise of his hand, a gesture of such finality that Thorne's words died in his throat. The lieutenant looked up from his datapad, his face completely drained of color. Sir, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I have it, but it must be a mistake. The security clearance is. It's above mine. It's above yours. Vance's gaze never left the woman. Read it, he commanded softly. The lieutenant swallowed hard, his eyes wide with disbelief as he read from the screen. His voice was unsteady, cracking under the weight of the words he was forced to speak into the tomb-like silence of the command center. Service record. Read, Evelyn. Rank. He paused, taking a shaky breath. Fleet Admiral, a shockwave, silent and powerful, rolled through the CIC. Jaws dropped, eyes widened. Commander Thorne took a physical step back, his face contorting from arrogance to confusion to a dawning, sickening horror. The lieutenant continued, his voice growing stronger with each earth-shattering revelation. Active duty, Supreme Allied Command. Currently on detached Special Observation Tour of Outer Rim facilities. Call sign, Ghost. Each word was a hammer blow to Thorne's reality. The old woman he had insulted, the civilian he had shoved against a wall, was not just a senior officer. She was one of the 5 individuals who commanded the entirety of fleet operations. The lieutenant, now reading with a sort of terrified awe, began listing her commendations. Recipient of the Star of Valor for actions during the Siege of Orion. Awarded the Grand Cross of the Fleet for strategic command during the Black Nebula campaign. Architect of the Prometheus Gambit that ended the Cygnus Rebellion. The list went on, a litany of legendary battles and heroic deeds, a career that was the very bedrock of modern naval history. Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the stories from the Academy, the almost mythical tales of a pilot-turned-strategist, known only as Ghost, a commander so brilliant, so far beyond the pale, that her official records were sealed above even the highest security clearances. And he had shoved her. He had called her old woman. He had ordered her removed from his deck. The full, crushing weight of his arrogance settled upon him, threatening to buckle his knees. Captain Vance slowly, deliberately, drew himself up to his full height. He faced Fleet Admiral Evelyn Reed, and in a gesture of profound, unconditional respect that silenced all remaining doubt, he executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his long career. Admiral, Vance said, his voice thick with emotion. Welcome to Aegis 7. My apologies for the inadequate reception. One by one, every single person on that deck, from the lowest-ranking technician to the most senior watch officer, followed their captain's lead. They snapped to attention, their hands raised in a unified, crisp salute. The forest of arms was a testament to her true authority, an authority she had not needed to announce, but had simply, quietly, and devastatingly demonstrated. The only one left standing, frozen in a state of abject humiliation, was Commander Valerius Thorne. The story of what happened in the Aegis 7 CIC spread, not like wildfire, but like a change in atmospheric pressure, an invisible, pervasive shift that was felt everywhere at once. Within an hour, every soul on the station knew. By the end of the day, the tale had been relayed via encrypted comms to every ship in the sector. It became known by many names: the day the Ghost landed, Thorn's Folly, or most popularly among the pilots, the Archangel's Reception. The sensor logs of the Stalwart's impossible docking were downloaded and studied with a reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. Simulator jockeys across the fleet spent weeks trying to replicate the Archangel's feather, only to crash their virtual ships in a virtual docking rings, gaining a new, deeper appreciation for the skill they had heard about only in whispers. The incident became a new kind of legend, a modern parable for an age-old lesson. It was a story told in hushed tones in mess halls, in engineering bays, and on the bridges of destroyers patrolling the lonely darkness of the Outer Rim. It was a story about how the shiniest uniform doesn't always house the sharpest mind, and how true power often wears the quietest camouflage. Commander Thorn was not formally disciplined, at least not in a way that would ever appear on a public record. Admiral Reed, it was said, refused to file a report. Her reasoning, passed down through Captain Vance, was simple. The uniform was not offended. A man's pride was. The latter is a self-correcting problem. Thorn's punishment was far more effective than any official reprimand. He was forced to live with the silent judgment in the eyes of his crew, to endure the sudden, respectful silences that fell whenever he entered a room. He was a walking cautionary tale. A week after the incident, Commander Thorn requested a private meeting with Admiral Reed. He found her not in a VIP suite, but in one of the station's hydroponics bays, tending to a row of Earth-native orchids, her gray jumpsuit smudged with soil. He stood before her, stripped of all his bluster and arrogance, his posture stooped. He offered a formal, stilted apology, reciting the words he had clearly rehearsed. She listened patiently, her attention fixed on the delicate petals of a flower. When he was finished, a painful silence stretched between them. Finally, she looked up, her eyes not filled with anger or pity, but with a calm, analytical clarity. "Competence is the only apology the uniform requires, Commander," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You were tested, and you were found wanting, not because you failed to save the Stalwart, but because you failed to see the solution standing right beside you. Your eyes were so fixed on the symbols of authority that you couldn't recognize the genuine article." She turned back to her orchids. "Learn to see the person, Commander, not the rank. See the skill, not the insignia. That is your path forward." Thorn stood there for a long moment, the simple, devastating truth of her words washing over him. He finally nodded, a single, jerky motion, and left without another word. The encounter changed him. The crew of Aegis 7 began to notice a difference. The booming voice was quieter. He started asking questions of the junior technicians, listening to their answers. He was seen in the simulators, not barking orders, but quietly observing, learning. He had been publicly humbled, but in that humiliation he found the beginning of wisdom. The auxiliary navigation console the Admiral had used became an unofficial landmark. Someone, a young ensign from the Stalwart's engineering crew, had affixed a small, crudely engraved brass plate to its side. It read, "Secondary Flight Control, Ghost Station." It became a point of pride for the station, a quiet reminder that legends could walk among them, unassuming and unseen, waiting for a moment to reveal the profound difference between wearing authority and truly embodying it. Months bled into a year. Fleet Admiral Evelyn Reed was long gone, having completed her tour and vanished back into the higher echelons of Fleet Command as quietly as she had appeared. Yet, her presence lingered on Aegis 7, woven into the very culture of the station. The Thorn incident had become a foundational story, a mandatory part of the orientation for every new officer and enlisted crew member assigned to the sector. Captain Vance himself would often lead the tour for newly commissioned ensigns. He would bring them to the bustling CIC, let them watch the controlled, professional flow of information and command. He would see the ambition and arrogance in their young eyes, the same look he had once seen in Thorn's. Then he would lead them to the quiet auxiliary console in the corner, tap the small brass plaque, and tell them the story. He would tell them about the crippled destroyer, the arrogant commander, and the quiet old woman in the gray jumpsuit who saved them all not with rank, but with pure, undeniable competence. He would watch their faces change as the story unfolded, see the dawning understanding that the universe did not always reward the loudest voice in the room. His speech became a tradition, a piece of living folklore. "Look at this place," he would say, gesturing to the entire command deck. "It runs on procedure. It runs on discipline. It runs on the chain of command. But when all of that fails, when the rulebook is burning and the abyss is staring back at you, it runs on one thing and one thing only: the person in the console. It doesn't matter what they're wearing. It doesn't matter what insignia is on their collar. All that matters is what they know and what they could do." The lesson was profound, and it stuck. Junior officers felt more empowered to voice unorthodox solutions. Senior officers learned to listen, to look past the surface, and seek out the quiet competence that might be hidden in the most unlikely of places. The entire station became more efficient, more resilient, a better command, all because one woman had refused to be defined by another's ignorant assumptions. The legacy of that single day was not a statue or a medal. It was a living, breathing change in the hearts and minds of 1,000 people. It was in the way a veteran Master Chief would now listen patiently to a brand new recruit's idea. It was in the way Commander Thorne, now a quieter, more thoughtful leader, would personally mentor young officers, constantly reminding them, "Don't assume. Watch. Listen. Respect the skill, not the sleeve." The story of Evelyn Reed became a symbol of a deeper truth: that true worth is not proclaimed, but demonstrated. It is forged in the crucible of crisis, measured in deeds, not words, and paid for with a lifetime of discipline and silent dedication. Her legend wasn't about the superhuman feat of docking the stalwart. It was about the superhuman composure she displayed when disrespected, the profound confidence that needed no external validation. She had proven that respect is a debt owed to competence, and that arrogance is a currency that will always, eventually, be found worthless. The universe is full of noise, of people shouting their own importance, demanding recognition based on the superficial scaffolding of rank and title. But true legacy, the kind that endures, is built in the quiet spaces. It's built in the steady hands that solve the unsolvable problem, in the calm voice that cuts through the panic, in the unwavering gaze that sees the truth when everyone else is blinded by fear. It is the quiet professional, the unseen master, the hidden legend, who truly shapes the future, not with grand pronouncements, but with single, perfect, undeniable acts of excellence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent strength defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.